The Galactic Council chamber was a monument to unity, at least in theory. Its vaulted ceilings shimmered with holographic starlight, and the stone-like walls pulsed faintly with a cool blue energy that signified order and peace among the stars. But today, the chamber was thick with tension. Delegates from dozens of alien species packed the circular hall, their voices low, suspicious glances exchanged, claws and tendrils twitching in restrained anxiety. No one spoke above a whisper, not until the human representative stood at the center of the room. Commander Elias Andrus was a tall, composed figure. His uniform was crisp, bearing no medals or ornate decoration, just the seal of the Terran Coalition over his left chest. He stood alone, hands clasped behind his back, his stance relaxed but unmistakably firm. There was no microphone. He didn't need one. Every word that would leave his mouth would echo louder than the voice of any amplifier because of what had just happened. Piai, a regal diplomat of the Asian species, perched nervously in his seat, mandibles twitching. He had heard humans speak before, polite, diplomatic, almost eager to fit into the cosmic order that had existed long before their arrival. But something about Andrus was different today. The usual friendly tone was gone, replaced by a calm that felt unnerving. As Carl watched him, he couldn't help but feel the temperature in the chamber drop. "Commander Andrus," came the voice of Perut, an elder of the Lazan order, his words marked with a distinctive clicking cadence. "The incidents involving human colonies in the outer sector have raised certain concerns." Andrus said nothing. His face remained unreadable. He waited. Perut hesitated, his mandibles shifting. Some members questioned the appropriateness of your species' actions in response. The disintegration of the ETH station resulted in the deaths of several thousand beings, none of whom were human. And we are yet to receive any formal apology or sign of remorse from your government. Still no visible change from Andrus. Just a slow, deliberate breath. Then he spoke. "Representative Perut," he said evenly, his voice neither cold nor hostile but firm, as though he'd repeated these words in his mind 1,000 times before. "The ETH station launched an unprovoked assault on a civilian human outpost. They destroyed everything, no survivors." His words hit the chamber like a slap. Whispers stirred, a few gasps. Andrus's gaze swept slowly across the gathered representatives, watching the discomfort settle in. "You all speak of peace, of law, of civilization," he continued. "But somehow, you've decided that the rules apply to everyone except us." A low murmur rippled through the chamber, the kind of nervous energy that comes when a truth too long ignored is finally spoken aloud. A delegate from the Zartan, a towering reptilian species clad in shimmering armored scales, raised a clawed hand. "Are you suggesting, Commander, that the human race intends to act outside the established laws of engagement?" Andrus tilted his head slightly. "Not at all," he replied. "But every species has a line, a point past which patience turns into resolve. Ours was crossed a while back. We've just taken longer than most to act on it." The Zartan delegate snorted, puff of greenish vapor escaping his nostrils. "Patience," he scoffed. "You call this patience? Dozens of colonies reduced to rubble, non-human lives lost." "What does human patience mean?" Andrus interrupted. "When the lives of our people are taken, and the only response from this council is silence?" His voice hadn't risen, but the quiet steel beneath it made every ear in the room hone in. And suddenly, Coral understood. This wasn't a man issuing threats. This was a man who had already made peace with the consequences. It hadn't always been like this. When humanity first joined the council, they were eager to contribute, to learn, to adapt. Their technology was impressive, their curiosity boundless. And above all, they believed in the promise of unity. The Terran Coalition had sent diplomats, engineers, even aid workers to assist other species. They signed every treaty, obeyed every regulation, even when those rules put them at a disadvantage. And yet, when humanity's own colonies were under threat, the council offered little more than sympathy and delay. Another delegate spoke up, a Myrthan, with cavernous eyes that drank in the chamber's light. "Couldn't your people have requested our help? Asked for mediation? There must have been a path other than destruction." Andrus raised a brow, almost amused. "Requested? We did. For years. We asked for mutual defense treaties, for shared patrols, even for a single observer station near our outer colonies. Every time, we were told the same thing: it would escalate tensions. It's not within council protocol, be patient." He scanned the room. "So we waited. We played by the rules. And while we did, our people were slaughtered." That word "slaughtered" hit the room like a cannon. There was no mistaking what it meant. Not a military engagement, not a border skirmish. Mass murder. Perut raised a hand again, this time more hesitantly. "We understand your frustration, Commander, but still, the destruction of the S station was that truly the only option?" Andrus looked him dead in the eye. "Tell me, Representative, what's the proper response when your civilians are burned alive in their homes? What's the exact number of alien lives that makes it fair?" Silence. No one dared answer, because deep down, they all knew the truth. If their species had been targeted like humanity, if their children had died screaming under foreign bombs, they would have done the same. Perhaps worse. Andrus took a step forward, his boots echoing across the smooth council floor. "We followed every law, respected every process, even when those processes failed us. But if you think we'll just keep waiting while our people die, then you haven't been paying attention." Coral shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He had served on the council for over a century, observing hundreds of debates, treaties, and conflicts. But he had never seen this. Humanity wasn't just angry. They were resolute, weary, hardened, like a species that had hoped for peace only to find themselves alone in a room full of spectators. Another delegate, a hulking bird-like diplomat from the Tovani, ruffled his feathers in nervous protest. "Commander, are you saying that any future threat to human life will be met with force?" Andrus crossed his arms. "I'm saying that any future threat will be met with whatever is necessary to ensure our people's safety. Whether that's diplomacy or destruction, that depends on the threat." A chilling silence fell over the chamber. No shouting, no raised voices, just a collective understanding that a line had been crossed and that humanity would not be stepping back. Quarren looked around and saw the same unease in other faces. For too long, the council had assumed that humanity was just another new species trying to earn its place. But they had miscalculated. Humans weren't here to beg. They were here to survive. And if survival meant doing what others wouldn't, they were more than ready. The chair, an ethereal being known simply as Chair, with translucent segmented limbs, and a voice like shifting wind, finally rose from his elevated seat. "Commander Andrus," the chair intoned, "you have made your position clear. But understand, declarations such as this could destabilize our shared peace." Andrus nodded, his expression unreadable. "Then perhaps your peace needs re-examining." Coral's breath caught. It was a line delivered with quiet fury, and one that pierced the heart of the entire council chamber. For years, unity had been the ideal, but today, for the first time, the cracks were visible. Not because humanity was rejecting unity, but because the rest of the council had failed to include them in it. Andrus stood silent once more. Not triumphant, not angry, just tired. Like a man who had carried too many losses and finally realized he had nothing left to lose. The council could argue, posture, and deliberate all it wanted. But one thing was now certain. Humanity had spoken, and this time they would not be ignored. The room was quiet now, not the calm before the storm, but the silence that follows a truth spoken too plainly to be ignored. Commander Elias Andrus stood alone at the center of the Galactic Council. his voice still echoing in the minds of those seated around him. There had been no outburst, no shouting, no dramatics, just cold facts delivered with a calm so deliberate it made the air feel colder. What rattled the chamber wasn't his volume, it was the weight of what he said and what it revealed. High above, the council's central dome glowed with a filtered blue light meant to evoke clarity and unity, a symbolic gesture that had lost much of its meaning over time. Beneath that light, rows of alien representatives shifted in discomfort. No one wanted to look at each other, let alone at the human commander who had just called out the very system they all claimed to uphold. Coral, the Asian diplomat who had served for nearly 200 galactic cycles, sat frozen in reflection. He had known this moment might come, but he hadn't expected it to feel this justified. Not this raw. Andres wasn't wrong, and that was what made it so dangerous. The Murthan representative, his dark, hollow eyes glistening like twin voids, leaned forward, his voice soft and composed, barely cut through the tension. "Commander Andres, surely you understand the Council's limitations. We have laws, protocols, procedures for intervention. You know we cannot simply act on emotion." Andres turned his head slowly, the muscles in his jaw tightening. "Limitations?" he said. "Is that what we're calling it now?" The Murthan blinked but didn't respond. Andres took a breath and stepped forward again. His tone never rose, but it struck like a hammer all the same. "We requested help, not once, not twice. For over a decade, we submitted proposals, appeals, petitions. We asked for shared patrols in the outer sectors, asked for access to the defense networks your species take for granted, asked for the right to defend our colonies under Council oversight. And each time, what did we hear?" He paused, his eyes sweeping across the chamber. Nothing. A few delegates squirmed. The Triaxian ambassador whispered something to her aide. The Zark-10 scratched at the armrest of his seat with a claw. "We were told that sending ships might destabilize the region, that arming our colonies might provoke aggression, that the Council must remain neutral until definitive proof of an attack was presented. And in the meantime, our people died." He let the final word linger. Coral felt a bitter knot tighten in his chest. He remembered the briefings, reports of pirate factions hitting human colonies. The same pirate factions the Council had refused to acknowledge officially because it might have required them to act. The hypocrisy wasn't new, but today it had been dragged out into the light. "Let me ask all of you something," Andres continued, voice low but resonant. "If a Lazen colony had been hit, would you have waited for 3 months of evidence? If a Tovani station had gone dark, would you have asked for a committee investigation first? Or would you have mobilized instantly?" He didn't need an answer. The silence spoke for itself. "We've all seen it," he went on. "When a Council core world gets threatened, fleets are dispatched within days. When a senior diplomat's territory is disturbed, you call emergency sessions. But when our outer colonies were razed, you asked us to file reports." A nervous shuffle passed through the delegates. The truth was inconvenient, uncomfortable, and undeniable. "You say laws must be upheld," Andres said, turning now to the Zark-10, who had previously questioned humanity's restraint. "Where were those laws when our freighters were attacked, our outposts bombed? The laws were silent until we acted, and suddenly, we're the problem." The Zark-10 snarled low, but said nothing. Andres continued. "The Eth station, yes, we destroyed it. And yes, lives were lost. But not before they wiped out an entire civilian settlement, men, women, children, unarmed, burned alive in their homes." He stopped for a moment, not for effect. He looked tired, hollowed out, like a man who had carried this memory alone for far too long. "We asked for justice," he said quietly. "What we got was bureaucracy." The Tovani delegate fluffed his silver feathers in protest. "But you must understand, Commander, law is the only thing that keeps chaos at bay. If every species acted as you have, there would be no order, only vengeance. Andros met his gaze. Then maybe your laws need to evolve, because order without justice is just well-managed oppression. Coral exhaled slowly. That line would haunt this chamber for years. He could feel it. The council had always operated on consensus, on the illusion of unity, but that illusion had often come at the expense of fairness. And the humans, newcomers that they were, had followed every rule until the rules failed them. What would you have had us do? Andros asked the room. Wait for the next attack? Hold another vote? Draft another resolution that no one enforces? How many of our dead would satisfy your sense of decorum? There were no answers, only the rising awareness that the system had been exposed. Andros paced slowly, then came to a stop in the center again. Let me be clear, he said. This isn't about revenge. It's about survival. And if the council's laws don't protect us, then we will protect ourselves. You can call it what you want: escalation, overreach, even aggression. But we call it what it truly is: a response. A long overdue response to the galaxy's silence. The chair rose again, voice smooth and diplomatic. Commander, you speak of silence, but we have always listened. Andros laughed softly. There was no humor in it. You've heard, he said, but you haven't listened. There's a difference. For years, humans had tried to be part of this interstellar community. They sent cultural envoys, opened trade routes, honored every code. But the council had looked down on them as primitive, emotional, unpredictable. And now, when humans had finally acted like the very species the council admired, assertive, decisive, willing to fight, they were being condemned for it. It was more than unfair. It was betrayal. The Myrthan delegate cleared his throat. Commander, if you feel the council has failed your people, why remain in it at all? Andros didn't hesitate. Because we still believe in what this could be. We believe in a galaxy where cooperation isn't just a slogan, but belief requires action. And we've run out of faith. The admission was like a slow shattering of glass. Coral saw it then, perhaps more clearly than he ever had. Humanity wasn't walking away from the council. They were holding a mirror to it, and what it saw was uglier than any war. The truth is, Andros said, looking up at the grand dome above them, we thought this council would be different. We thought maybe we didn't have to be the strongest. That reason and law might be enough. But law without protection is a lie. And we've had enough of lies. He turned back toward the chair. So either the laws apply to all, or they apply to none. But don't ask us to sacrifice our people to preserve the illusion of order. We're done pretending. The silence that followed was unlike anything Coral had experienced in that chamber before. Not scandalized, not angry, just stunned. The council had prided itself on balance, wisdom, structure. But now it was facing the consequences of its own indifference. A young species, forged in adversity, had come asking for justice. And when they were denied, they became something the council feared: independent. The hypocrisy wasn't just in the system, it was in all of them. For as long as they had been part of the Galactic Council, humans had been a curiosity, an anomaly, not because of their biology or their homeworld or even their technological capabilities, but because of how hard they tried. Other species had centuries, millennia, even of history with one another, shared wars, old treaties, long-standing rivalries. Humanity came in fresh, wide-eyed, ambitious, eager. They studied the Council's protocols, memorized diplomatic history, offered assistance where others wouldn't. And for a time, that idealism had been admired. Then it became overlooked, then mocked, and finally ignored. Coral had watched this evolution with a mix of interest and unease. He remembered the first human diplomat, an older woman with gray-streaked hair and sharp eyes, who had smiled far too much and asked far too many questions. She had spoken of hope, of a unified galaxy, She believed in it. She bled for it, metaphorically and eventually, quite literally, in a pirate attack on a peace envoy that no council fleet ever responded to. Now, decades later, that hopeful gleam in the eyes of humanity was gone. What remained was Commander Andrus, hard-eyed, calm, and carrying the weight of every unanswered call for help. As Andrus stood in the center of the council chamber, no longer pleading but declaring, the weight of the past echoed through his presence. He wasn't just speaking for his people, he was speaking from wounds still bleeding. "You know," Andrus began, quieter now, like someone speaking to a room of old ghosts, "the first time one of our colonies was attacked, we thought it was a mistake. Some rogue faction. We waited, sent out diplomatic feelers. Not a single council member responded. Not one. The delegates remained still, listening. So we rebuilt, buried our dead, sent more messages, more evidence, more requests. We asked, not demanded. We followed the protocol. We trusted that the system worked." He looked out across the circular hall, locking eyes with no one and everyone all at once. Then the second attack came. Different system, different attackers. We lost a science facility, 2 research vessels, and a civilian convoy that never stood a chance. Again, we waited. Again, silence. He let the word hang. That's when we started asking ourselves if you even saw us as equals, or if we were just guests, polite ones expected to keep our heads down, play by your rules, and be grateful we were let in. The tension in the room grew dense, like a fog settling over ancient ruins. The Triaxian delegate, her iridescent scales flickering with unease, raised a hand. "Commander, the Council does not ignore threats." "No," Andrus cut in. "Still controlled, still precise. Tell that to the families of Outpost Theta, or the children from New Canberra, or the medics from the Eridana shelter who died waiting for a Council relief ship that never arrived." He stepped forward. "We waited, we obeyed. We restrained ourselves because we believed in something bigger than our species. We believed in the Council's vision. But belief doesn't protect your people when the bombs fall." Coral watched him carefully. He could feel it now. The underlying frustration wasn't new. It had been building for years, like pressure behind a dam that no one else noticed cracking. Andrus wasn't acting out of sudden fury. He was carrying the weight of hundreds of unresolved tragedies. The Zartan, never one for subtlety, spoke again. "And yet, with all this pain, you chose retaliation, destruction. You abandoned diplomacy." "No," Andrus said flatly. "We exhausted it. That shut the Zartan up, for a moment." "I've sat in this chamber," Andrus continued, "while delegates debated whether a blockade around one world should last 6 months or 12. I've seen emergency votes held over tariff disputes. But when it was human blood spilled, we were told to wait for hearings, for reports, for neutral observers. And when we did everything right and nothing changed, we finally did something else." His eyes scanned the chamber again. "Not accusing, just exposing. You think we're dangerous now? But that's the mistake. You should be afraid of how long we weren't." That hit harder than anything he had said so far. The chair shifted uncomfortably in his elevated position. "Commander, are you suggesting that humanity has been silently suppressing this resentment for years?" Andrus shook his head. "Not resentment, hope. And every time we were ignored, we held on a little longer. We told ourselves you'd come around, that your hesitation wasn't about us, but eventually." He exhaled. "Hope runs out." From the back row, the Myrthan delegate murmured, "You say this isn't about dominance. Then what is it about?" Andrus looked at him with something close to sympathy. "It's about not being treated like a problem every time we try to protect our own. We're not angry because we want war. We're angry because we tried peace and were punished for it." Coral had to admit, the logic was brutal but fair. Humanity had never launched the first attack. Their retaliation at Eth Station, however devastating, had come only after repeated aggression, yet the council had made no move until that moment. Only then had they cried foul. "It's easy to judge restraint when you've never needed it," Andrus said. "When your worlds are protected, your skies patrolled, your laws enforced. But we came from a planet that burned itself nearly to death. We survived, not by avoiding conflict, but by learning when to end it. You look at our actions and see escalation. We see survival." The room remained silent. He let that sink in. "We don't want to be feared," he continued, "but we won't be ignored anymore." The Zarktan crossed his arms. "Then what? You want us to bow? To admit fault for every misstep?" Andres's voice didn't change. "No, we want you to see us, not as a wild card, not as a potential threat, but as what we are, members of this council who have paid in lives for the right to be heard." There it was. The truth. Not just anger, but pain. Loss. Disappointment so deep it had forged steel from sorrow. Coral leaned back in his chair, the weight of realization pressing into his chest. All these years, humanity hadn't been silent because they lacked the power to speak. They were silent because they believed it would make a difference. And now, with that belief gone, the galaxy had to face what it had created. Not a monster, but a protector, pushed too far. Andrus turned slowly, addressing the entire room once more. "You all ask what restraint looks like," he said. "It looks like asking for help instead of revenge. It looks like rebuilding the same colony 3 times and still choosing diplomacy. It looks like holding funerals instead of firing back. And now you ask us why we finally hit back." He shook his head. "The better question is what took us so long." Coral felt a cold shiver run through him. The answer wasn't comforting. It wasn't simple, it was human. Andrus stood in the center of the chamber like a judge, not issuing a sentence, but revealing a verdict long ignored. Not guilty, just done. A final voice rose, a soft one, from the youngest delegate, a pale blue maverick with glowing tendrils. "Commander, what would you have done if the council had responded sooner?" Andrus paused. "Maybe nothing," he said honestly. "Maybe we wouldn't have lost so much. Maybe we wouldn't have had to become the thing you all now fear. But we'll never know, will we?" He didn't say it with bitterness. He said it with the weariness of someone who had watched hope die one unanswered call at a time. And as he stepped back, folding his arms behind his back again, the chamber remained still. No arguments, no interruptions, just silence, honest, fragile silence. Coral finally understood what so many had missed. Humanity's strength wasn't in its weapons, or its technology, or even its passion. It was in its ability to endure the worst of the galaxy, and still come asking for peace. Until now. Now they'd stopped asking. Now they were simply telling. And the galaxy would have to listen or watch what happens when a species with that much fire chooses, finally, to stop restraining it. The Galactic Council had always prided itself on structure, protocol, balance. At least, that's what the Council liked to believe. But as Commander Elias Andrus stood at the center of the most powerful interstellar alliance in known space, it was clear that something fundamental had cracked, not just between humanity and the Council, but within the very core of what the Council claimed to represent. Silence still echoed in the chamber from Andres's earlier words. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't delivered ultimatums with fury. But he had done something far more unnerving. He had spoken truth with such weary clarity that not a single delegate dared interrupt. The truth didn't come with shouting. It came in the stillness of a species that had finally accepted that no one was coming to help them. And now, with all pretense gone, Andrus was ready to ask not for favors, not for apologies, but for independence. Chair, the ethereal, translucent being presiding over the council, finally broke the silence, its segmented arms lifting in a motion meant to soothe. Commander Andres, Chair began, you've made your frustration clear, but the Council exists to prevent unilateral action, to prevent the kind of chaos that tears civilizations apart. Surely you see the risk of what you're proposing. Andres didn't blink. What I see is that the only thing keeping chaos at bay is our restraint, not your policies, murmurs rose. A few delegates shifted in visible discomfort. The implication was clear. Humanity was no longer willing to tie its own hands just to make others feel comfortable. You call it risk, Andres continued, but you ignore the fact that we've lived with that risk every day alone. Our outer colonies have been defended not by Council fleets, but by converted transport ships, old orbital guns, and volunteers with rifles. And yet we were told to wait, to comply, to trust. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. That trust is gone. The Tovani ambassador and elder with shimmering silver feathers and sharp, intelligent eyes spoke next. And what exactly are you asking for, Commander? Be specific. Andres took a breath and stepped forward, his shadow stretching under the cot. We are asking for the autonomy to defend ourselves without Council interference. We will still honor our trees, still respect the basic tenets of interstellar law. But when it comes to protecting our people, we will no longer wait for permission. The words hung in the air like a storm cloud. The weight of them was not in their volume, but in their certainty. This wasn't a request. It was a line being drawn. Qian, still watching from his seat, felt a shift ripple through the chamber. This wasn't grandstanding. This wasn't a demand fueled by pride or vengeance. It was survival, spoken plainly. You mean, said the Murthan diplomat slowly, you wish to operate militarily without oversight? Andres turned to him. No. We intend to operate militarily when our civilians are threatened and no one else responds. We followed every channel, sent every petition, waded through every delay, and it got us nothing but graves. If the Council won't defend our people, then we will. The Triaxian delegate leaned forward, her scales flickering with tension. You understand what that means, Commander. Once you act outside the Council's direct command, your actions are your own responsibility. That includes the political consequences. Andres met her gaze. We accept that. We've accepted it for years now. What we won't accept is being told to sit still while our homes burn. A low, growling voice rose from the Zarktan representative. This smells like a threat. You act now, and the next time it's one of our stations destroyed, who will hold you accountable? Andres's voice turned colder. The same ones who held the Eth station accountable after it wiped out a human colony. Oh right, no one. The room fell quiet again. Chair, ever the mediator, lifted its arms. Surely we can find middle ground. There is no middle ground, Andres interrupted, for the first time allowing a trace of frustration to slip into his tongue. Not when our people are dying. Middle ground was what we tried. For decades, we begged for cooperation. We extended every courtesy, and we were met with bureaucracy and indifference. He gestured toward the Council rows. Let me be blunt. You all like having humans around so long as we stay in our place. You like our technology, our adaptability. But when we asked to be treated as equals truly equal, you gave us ceremonial seats and silenced microphones. Coral flinched inwardly. He knew the truth of it. The Council had relegated humanity to the sidelines in too many matters. Too young, they said. Too emotional. Never outright discrimination, but the weight of 1,000 excuses added up all the same. Andres lowered his voice, but every syllable hit like stone. So here's the deal. We will continue to cooperate. We will honor peace where peace is possible. But if one more human settlement is attacked, if one more child dies screaming in the dark of space, we won't wait for a vote. He looked directly at Chair. We will act. Chair's translucent form pulsed gently, like bioluminescence under pressure. And if the Council deems those actions unlawful, then do what you must, Andres said. The line had been crossed long ago, and now humanity was simply acknowledging it. The Marian ambassador, his claws clicking against the metal panel before him, asked in a quieter tone, "So this is it? Independence from the council?" Andres shook his head. "Not from the council. From the illusion that our safety depends on your approval." That distinction mattered. It wasn't a declaration of rebellion. It was a declaration of self-respect. The chair addressed the chamber at large. "Let us not rush to judgment. If we are to accept this autonomy, we must understand that it shifts the balance of our unity. It changes how we operate as a collective." Quarrel scanned the chamber. The old guard was divided, some fearful, some quietly agreeing. And the younger delegates, those who had less pride to protect, looked shaken, but thoughtful. Then Perut, the Lazan elder who had begun the confrontation, raised his hand once more. "Commander, you've spoken of pain and betrayal. But surely you must see that complete autonomy opens the door for retaliation to become policy, for war to replace negotiation." Andres looked directly at him, his voice soft but resolute. "We're not choosing war, we're choosing preparedness. The only reason our last response seemed extreme to you is because we waited too long. We tried everything else, but our restraint became your excuse for inaction. That won't happen again." The council chamber darkened slightly as the orbital station shifted, the ambient light adjusting. It felt symbolic, like the galaxy itself was tilting under the weight of a new truth. Chair's voice lowered. "If the council grants this autonomy, it must be understood that it is final. No partial revocation, no future review. Humanity will carry the full consequences of its independence." Andres nodded slowly. "We understand, and we accept." Coral felt a weight settle on his shoulders. The moment was historic. It wasn't a declaration of secession, but it might as well have been. Humanity wasn't asking to leave. They were demanding to stop being managed. A young delegate, barely old enough to remember the last interstellar war, asked quietly, "Commander, what happens if this ends badly?" Andres gave the faintest shrug. "Then it ends, but it ends on our terms. We'd rather die standing than keep begging on our knees." The silence that followed was deep and long. Chair finally spoke. "Very well. The matter will be put to a vote." Andres stood in the center as the holographic screens lit up, each delegate casting their decision. The room buzzed with faint currents of energy as the system tallied results. Coral didn't look at the vote count. He already knew the outcome. When the final tally appeared, humanity granted full defensive autonomy. A subdued wave passed through the room. Not victory, not celebration, just inevitability. Andres exhaled, barely perceptibly. Coral could tell he hadn't expected the vote to pass. Or maybe he had, but not without resistance. Chair looked at him. "Commander, the council recognizes your autonomy. May it be used wisely." Andres gave a respectful nod. "It will be used justly. That's more than we've been offered." As he turned to leave the chamber, every step echoed not just physically, but across the history of the council itself. This was no longer the same governing body. Something fundamental had changed. Andres didn't speak again as he walked out. He didn't need to. He had said everything that needed to be said. Humanity wasn't breaking away. They were finally breaking free. The vote had passed. The numbers were lit up in radiant light above the council floor, undeniable, irreversible. Humanity would be granted full autonomy in military and defensive matters without need for council authorization. But there was no applause, no ceremony. The chamber remained still, solemn, as if everyone inside had just watched a pillar crack and didn't know whether to brace or run. Commander Elias Andres didn't celebrate. He didn't flinch either. He stood exactly as he had since the beginning of the session, spine straight, eyes steady, arms relaxed behind his back, like a soldier awaiting orders that would never come. His posture was the same, but something in the room had changed. The power dynamic had shifted, and every delegate felt it. Chair, the ageless, translucent being who presided over the council, turned slowly in his elevated sphere, hands folded together. His voice, always smooth and modulated, wavered slightly now. "Commander Andrus," he said carefully, "this decision alters the framework of our governance. What has been granted here today is not just a policy shift, it sets precedent. You understand this?" Andrus gave a slow nod. "I do." Chair paused, studying the human's face with an unreadable expression. "And you understand the responsibility that comes with such autonomy?" "Yes," Andrus said, with no hesitation. "We understand it better than anyone." There was a moment so brief it could have gone unnoticed where Chair looked genuinely unsettled. Kiai, from his seat along the third row, caught it. He had worked with Chair for nearly a century. He had never seen him doubt his own authority, until now. The Zartan delegate, known for his sharp tongue and bone-plated scales, finally rose. His nostrils flared slightly, venting a faint green mist into the air as he spoke. "So be it. The Council has voted. But let it be known, if humanity uses this autonomy to overstep, if their retaliation spirals beyond defense, there will be consequences." He wasn't yelling. It wasn't a threat in tone, but the weight was unmistakable. A line in the sand. Andrus turned his head toward the Zartan and replied, evenly and without emotion, "Understood, Representative. And if another human world is burned while this council debates its response, know that there will be no hesitation, no bureaucracy, no delay." He didn't smile. He didn't lean forward. He didn't posture. He just let the words fall, like a judge delivering a sentence. The room went quiet again. Every species present processed the exchange differently. Some with dread, some with grudging respect, some with quiet rage, but all of them heard it for what it was: not a threat, but a promise. Coral studied the expressions around the room. For years, the Council had assumed that humans were overeager diplomats trying to fit in. But now it was clear. The Terran Coalition wasn't here to be liked. They were here to survive, and they'd finally stopped asking for permission to do so. The Myrthan ambassador, his massive eyes like shimmering voids, spoke next. "Commander, there's no precedent for this, no fallback procedure. This is uncharted territory." "That's fine," Andrus replied. "We spent our entire history navigating uncharted territory. It's what we do." Chair floated forward, as close as protocol allowed him to get to the chamber floor. His segmented arms spread in what was meant to be a calming gesture. "There is still hope, Commander. This doesn't have to mean the beginning of separation. The Council values unity." Andrus met his gaze. "And start treating us like part of it." A ripple passed through the chamber, soft gasps, shifting chairs, antennae twitching. It was a simple statement, but it struck home. Chair began to speak again, but was interrupted not by a voice, but by the soft sound of the doors at the rear of the chamber opening. Security personnel entered quietly, symbolically. They weren't there to remove anyone, but the message was clear. The session was drawing to a close. Andrus had said his piece, but he wasn't done yet. As the last murmur faded, Andrus stepped forward once more. For the first time in the entire assembly, he allowed his voice to rise not into a shout, but into something undeniable. "I want every delegate in this room to remember something," he said. "This autonomy wasn't demanded. It was earned. Earned through years of obedience. Earned through restraint that none of you acknowledged. Earned through the blood of our citizens while this chamber remained quiet." He scanned the faces of the representatives, dozens of species, each one uniquely alien, yet now all wearing eerily similar expressions. Tensions, curiosity, uncertainty. "We are not breaking away from that, Council," he said. "We are breaking away from the fantasy that being a part of it was enough to keep our people safe." Another pause. Then the final blow. "You underestimated us. For too long, you confused our patience with weakness. You mistook our diplomacy for dependence. You thought we needed your approval, but now, you understand. Humanity didn't come here to conquer. We came here because we believed in something bigger. But when that belief was tested again and again, we stood alone. He nodded once, final, and we survived. The chamber sat in stunned silence. No one moved. Coral felt a chill on the back of his neck. He had sat through 100 debates more intense, more heated, more politically devastating. None of them had carried the emotional weight of what had just been said. This wasn't policy. This was personal. And not just for Andrus, for every human. Chair finally broke the silence, his voice softer now. Then this matter is concluded. The Terran Coalition shall receive the autonomy they've requested. This decision shall be recorded in the Central Charter and acknowledged across all member systems. Andrus gave a single, respectful nod. The Zarin delegate, a wiry being with pale green skin and silver veins visible beneath its flesh, leaned forward and spoke. "Commander, we trust you will wield this freedom with caution." Andrus turned just enough to face him. "We'll wield it with purpose." He let the words hang. Then he turned and walked toward the doors, the hem of his uniform swaying gently with each measured step. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. Kioi watched him go, standing to follow a few steps behind, calling out, "Commander Andrus." Andrus paused near the exit, allowing the Asian diplomat to catch up. Horng approached slowly, diplomatic robes flowing as he walked. "May I ask something?" he said, softer than before, a tone more of respect than inquiry. "Did you ever truly believe this council would protect you?" Andrus hesitated before answering. He stared off into the distance, through the massive windows lining the council hallway, where the stars stretched out endlessly in all directions. "We hoped it would," he said finally. "We wanted to believe we found a place where strength wouldn't have to be our only shield. But hope fades, Coral. And reality doesn't care about good intentions." Coral nodded slowly, the weight of the answer settling into his chest. "So that's why you pushed this through." Andrus gave the faintest smile, but it wasn't one of satisfaction. It was the kind of smile that only came after loss. "We tried everything else." Coral stood silently as the human commander turned again to leave. But before he disappeared into the corridor, Coral asked one last question. "What will you do now?" Andrus paused at the threshold, glancing over his shoulder. "What we've always done," he said. "Protect our people, build a future, even if we have to do it alone." And then he walked into the corridor, his silhouette fading into the ambient light of the station beyond. Inside the council chamber, the delegates remained seated, still grappling with the full meaning of what had occurred. A new reality had arrived. Humanity had not declared war. They had not turned rogue, but they had made it abundantly clear if the galaxy would not stand with them, then Earth would stand alone. And in that still, quiet moment, no one in the chamber doubted they could. In the days following the vote, the atmosphere within the Galactic Council changed. Something fundamental had shifted not just in protocol, but in perception. Humanity's declaration wasn't just another political maneuver. It was a tectonic shift, a line drawn not in ink or code, but in pain, perseverance, and blood. The chamber, once a monument to stability, now pulsed with a quiet unease. Conversations were hushed. Debates became more measured. The more arrogant delegates, those used to viewing humanity as emotional, unpredictable upstarts, began second-guessing their tone, their assumptions. For the first time, they didn't just listen to the human voice, they heard it. In private meetings, behind closed doors, discussions played out with more gravity than ever before. "What if they act unilaterally again?" one Traxian asked. "What if they become a precedent for others?" a Myrthan wondered. Or worse, the Zark-Tan growled. "What if we push them too far and they turn their backs completely?" Yet amid the fear and speculation, something else emerged, something quieter, more humbling: respect. It wasn't rooted in fear of human power. It was the reluctant admiration for a species that had tried diplomacy first. A species that had done everything right and still been burned. And when no one came to help them, they helped themselves. Quarles sat in his quarters, reviewing the transcript of the meeting. The words weren't just fresh in his mind, they were seared into it. Andrus had spoken not like a warrior or a politician, but like someone speaking on behalf of millions whose lives had been disregarded. What unsettled Quarles wasn't just what was said, it was how much of it he already knew, but had chosen not to act on. How many times had he read the reports about pirate raids on human settlements? How many requests had passed through his desk, asking for aid, for observers, for patrol routes, only to be buried beneath more urgent matters? There was no malice in his inaction, but there was indifference, and now the bill for that indifference had come due. Outside the council, in the broader galaxy, word of the vote spread faster than light. News networks across dozens of star systems replayed the final moments of Andrus's speech. Media outlets interviewed Terran citizens, some who mourned lost relatives, others who were simply relieved that, finally, someone had stood up and said, "Enough." For the first time in a long time, humanity wasn't portrayed as impulsive or chaotic. They were seen as clear-eyed, wounded, and determined. On distant colonies once dismissed as outer rim assets, flags were raised anew, not in defiance, but in pride. In the streets of New Canberra, rebuilt for the third time since its founding, families lit lanterns in remembrance of those lost. A monument was unveiled near the crater of what used to be Omega Field Station, its inscription simple: "Here we waited. Here we were forgotten. Never again." Andrus, meanwhile, declined all interviews. He didn't appear on council broadcasts or participate in press conferences. He returned to Earth, where he met with leadership, military officials, and most importantly, the families of those who had been victims of the very neglect he had spoken about. He visited the school children of Port Vega, survivors of the most recent attack, and sat with them as they told him about the day the sky burned. He shook the hands of colonists who had lost everything but still stood. He looked them in the eyes and gave them the only promise he felt he could keep. "You won't be ignored again." Back on the council station, Quarles finally requested a private meeting with Andrus. They met in a quiet observation deck, looking out over the swirling bands of the local gas giant. It wasn't an official chamber, just a forgotten spot in a corner of the station few used. Quarles thought it fitting. Truth had been neglected there once too. "I didn't vote," Quarles admitted. His voice low. Andrus glanced at him but said nothing. "Not against you," Quarles continued. "I abstained. I told myself it was for neutrality, but the truth is, I didn't know what to believe." Andrus turned back toward the stars. "It's not about belief, Quarles. It's about listening. We spoke for years. You just didn't hear us." There was no malice in his tone, just tired honesty. Quarles nodded slowly. "I've served on this council for a long time. I thought I understood diplomacy. I thought restraint meant strength. But I never thought about what happens when restraint becomes abandonment." Andrus gave a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "Now you do." They stood in silence for a while, the hum of the station filling the air like background music to a history neither of them could change. "I don't know if this council will survive the next century," Quarles finally said, "but I know now. It has to change." Andrus turned to him, then helped change it. Quarles looked up at the human commander. "Will your people still be willing to stand with us after everything?" Andrus didn't answer right away. "I think," he said finally, "we'll stand where we're respected, where we're heard. Whether that's beside the council or apart from it, that choice is yours now." He turned and left Quarles standing there, watching the vast spinning void beyond the glass. A new galaxy had been born, not through war, not through conquest, but through the painful rebirth of dignity. Epilogue. A lesson for all worlds long after the vote, long after the speeches had faded from memory and the headlines had been archived into galactic databases, the impact of humanity's stand continued to ripple outward, not through weaponized fleets or planetary invasions, but through the silent awakening of dozens of worlds. Species who had once remained quiet during council sessions began speaking up. Small colonies that had felt abandoned started forming coalitions. Refugees, miners, and forgotten frontier settlers, those who had once been told to wait while decisions were made light years away, began demanding their voices be heard. In time, a new doctrine was quietly circulated through council halls, not in the form of a treaty, but as a warning. Never confuse silence for consent. Never confuse diplomacy for weakness. And never, ever assume that a wounded people will always wait for help that never comes. The story of humanity's stand became a lesson not just for politicians or strategists, but for every generation across the stars. A lesson about the limits of patience, the price of neglect, and the power of standing up not to destroy, but to be seen. A lesson for us today, though set in a fictional universe of aliens and starships. The story of Commander Andress and humanity's breaking point mirrors a truth that resonates deeply with our own world. In nations where the marginalized wait years for justice, where promises are made but never fulfilled, where cries for help are lost in the noise of protocol and delay, we see the same pattern and the same risk. How many communities in our world have been told to wait, only to watch their pain dismissed as inconvenient? How many people are pushed to the brink, not because they were violent, but because they were ignored? Humanity's story in this fictional galaxy is not just a tale of vengeance. It's a warning, a reminder that silence from leadership is not neutrality, it's betrayal, that people can only be patient for so long before they must act. And when they do, the world should not be surprised if the response is not soft or polite, but sharp and final. So whether in council chambers among the stars or within the halls of power on Earth, the lesson remains the same. Respect must never be conditional. Dignity must never be postponed. And no one should ever have to fight just to be heard. Because when patience finally breaks, the whole galaxy listens.